back to my channel. Happy July. I cannot believe that June is over and behind us. I'm here to do my June wrap up with you, and I read 5 books in the month of June, so let's get into it. The first book that I read in June is a book that I do not own, which was Long Island Girls by Gabrielle Korn. This book came out in June. It is a sapphic romance, but I wouldn't really consider it a romance. I would consider it a literary fiction. It is based on Long Island, which is what drew me to it. I listened to the audiobook of it. I really enjoyed it. I had such a good time with this one. We follow our main character, Susan, who is going through the awkwardness of being a teenage girl, in addition to the complicated feelings that come up around finding your identity and being queer and navigating that around parents who aren't always have the capacity to navigate that with you. So it was very interesting to see how Susan found herself in a time in 2005 where, that was about 20 years ago. So in a time where acceptance isn't where it is now, not that acceptance is where it needs to be right now, but I think we are in a better place than we were 20 years ago. It was interesting to go on that journey with Susan. In addition to that, there were so many Long Island Easter eggs growing up on Long Island. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. It was just really interesting to read, and I loved being put back in that time spot. Susan has this love for indie rock music that was really at its peak in early 2000s. Being able to go with her to indie rock shows across the island, it was just a really nostalgic read for me. And then you also go from the early 2000s and you kind of grow with Susan as she establishes her career and she works in the music industry, and you see her kind of grow into her own identity. And then there is this love interest that was prominent in Susan's teenage years that kind of comes back along the way, and you realize how it was such a romanticized version of who Susan thought this love interest to be. And I think that was very nostalgic to how you are in your teenage years, where you're this is it, this is everything, this is my person. And then you look back and you're what was I actually thinking? This person is not it. So it was just such a great read. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I highly recommend if you're looking for something that is based on Long Island, if you are a fellow Long Islander, or just a queer romance that is more heavily set on identity and more of the lit fic side of sapphic romance. So yes, I enjoyed that one. If you're looking for an audiobook, I highly recommend it. And then the second book I read last month was How to Lose Yourself Completely by Peter Bognanni. This book is a young adult. It is based on our main character, Case, who is a teenager who has experienced a really great loss in his life. His brother passed away. He's having a really hard time processing this loss and feels really isolated in processing this loss because he was very close to his brother's girlfriend, and they have had this separation that has occurred after his brother's passing. So he feels isolated from the supports that he once knew. He obviously is grieving the loss of his brother and what a huge support that was in his life. And so his parents' answer to this in trying to find him help is sending him to a therapy camp. And adventure therapy is what they call it. They call it adventure therapy. It is basically a group of kids who are struggling with mental illness or addiction or whatever it is, their own form of struggle. And they are placed in this adventure therapy with this counselor who is a little bit of an interesting person. And then as they're navigating this hike or nature stuff that they're all in, they're camping in the wild. As they're navigating nature, the counselor goes missing. So they're all hello, we're young kids out in the wilds. We need to find this person, the adult that was in charge. And so they all kind of band together to find the counselor that has gone missing. And in that, I think Peter does a really good job of describing anxiety and panic, because you kind of see all of them become more and more stressed throughout this process of what's going to happen. And I really loved the prose that was in here for a young adult novel. I felt it spoke so much to anxiety, not only as a young adult, but just anxiety in general. Peter does a really good job of representing what that feels like. I really enjoyed this one. I do read YA novels. I pretty frequently, I like to read YA novels, and I felt this was a very good one, one that could be an adult read. If you have a teenager in your life who is struggling with anxiety or just is looking for a book to feel seen in, I recommend this one because I wish I had this book when I was younger. And then another book that I read in June was We Don't Talk About Carol by Kristen. This book focuses on our main character and goes through multi-generations. This was a mixture of a mystery, family generation, I enjoyed this one. I rated it 5 stars. I enjoyed the way Kristen told the story. It just felt super engaging, and I loved being on the like time jump of being with Sydney. So basically the backstory is Sydney is helping her mom and her sister sort through her grandmother's house after her grandmother's passing, stumbles upon this picture of this woman who looks pretty similar to her, finds out that this is Carol, an aunt of hers that went missing when Carol was younger as a teenager. So Sydney takes it upon herself as a journalist to like figure this mystery out. And you fall in love with Sydney's determination and her character on like what really happens and like why she needs to get to the bottom of it. And also alongside that, Sydney is going through her own journey with infertility and motherhood and just womanhood in general, and how being in IVF treatment has really taken a toll on her mental health and her marriage and her views of identity of herself. So as much as this is a mystery, like it's also just a really good story about feeling seen within fertility treatment. I just felt like there was a big piece of this book that is about fertility that isn't really spoken about in the back of the cover. So if that is a trigger for you, please be aware reading this. But I thought that it was a really good nod to like what it is like to be a woman who is thinking about being a mom or becoming a mom herself. I really loved Kristen's writing, and I will definitely be picking up something else by her in the near future. We Don't Talk About Carol was Kristen's debut book, but she has another book coming out in March of 2027 called Better Than You Know Yourself, and that will definitely be on my radar because I felt like this book was a mystery, but it didn't have the aspect of a thriller, and that's okay. Like I wasn't going in looking for a thriller, but I loved like the slow burn mystery element of it tied with Sydney's like identity piece, because it felt like I was reading a literary fiction that had the undertones of a mystery. And it was a sweet spot, you know, I just really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for a mystery by a BIPOC author, but also has some tones of womanhood and motherhood and just the struggles of fertility treatment and wanting to feel seen, but not wanting the book to be like a nonfiction read about fertility treatment, I recommend this one. And then I read The Misconnection by Miss Tia Williams. I absolutely love Tia Williams. If you don't know this about me, I'm a big fan. I am currently working through her backlist. I have to read The Perfect Find, which I plan to read in addition to watching the Netflix movie. This is based on her main character, Sasha Cruz. She is a casting director and ends up being selected to cast a big makeup stores. It's the equivalent of Sephora that's called Serafina in the book commercial. And so she's flying to Europe, and on her flight to Europe, she sits next to seat F. And they have this little meet cute, and they start yapping up a storm, and you realize that there's so much spark between them. But before she can get this mystery man's contact information, they get separated in like the whirlwind of landing, and they aren't able to find each other again. They do know that they both live in New York, so once does her business with Serafina and comes back to New York, she enlists Wes, who is our male main character and male POV in this book, who is a detective that she worked with in an occurrence that happened in her life earlier on where she was being stalked. And Wes was a private detective in another life before, where he is now a food truck entrepreneur. But in another life, he was a detective, and he helped her find the person that was stalking her. And I think they have this like bond with one another because Sasha found Wes at such a vulnerable time in her life where she was feeling really victimized by her stalker. There's a lot that goes into this. I love the way Tia Williams writes, so obviously I was tapping up a storm. I just love her banter. I love the way that she spoke to anxiety in this book as well. Sasha suffered from a lot of mental health struggles post the stalker being found. I feel like Tia spoke to that in such a beautiful way about the vulnerabilities of mental health. I vlogged the end of me reading this book, but she said something in this book that really stuck with me in how anxiety can be described. She said, it wasn't that she was feeling less anxious, it's that she wasn't caring as much about it, which was the trick. Feelings of paranoia, agoraphobia light, and fear were no surprise given her past trauma, and everyone felt panicky and weird sometimes. The difference between someone with an anxiety disorder and a quote-unquote normal person was that the normal person didn't let the fears take over. They felt them, noted them, and moved on with their lives. They didn't allow the demons to haunt them continuously day in and day out. There was a liberating lack of obsession. Like, Yes, I think the most difficult part about anxiety is knowing that you're in it and not being able to see your way through. And I think that speaks to what anxiety is like so beautifully. And that's what I love about Tia. Yes, there's equally spicy stuff happening in this book, and I will not lie about that. It is quite spicy and maybe like one of the spiciest books I've read from Tia. But in that same breath, she does speak to so many real life issues that women face and just speaks to it in such a way that puts a name and a face to it and helps you feel seen in her books. And that is what I love about Tia. Highly recommend The Misconnection. It is a perfect beach read. It is equally spicy, equally plot driven, equally a little bit of a mystery. I would definitely recommend picking this up if you're looking for something to grab the next time you're going to the beach. And then the last book that I read in June was A Plagued Sea by Kim Bo-young. This is a translated Korean fiction that is a horror novella. It's less than 200 pages. I mostly listened to the audiobook of it. Oh, it's less than 100 pages. It is a bit of a fever dream of a novella, to be honest. I think this is for a very specific reader, which is a reader that loves fever dream horror novellas. This book kind of reminded me of A Moonflow, if anyone has read that. It's kind of like there are creatures, there are monsters. The monsters speak to more things than just like face value, which I think with Moonflow, there was a lot about the monsters that spoke to how people perceive queerness. And I think that this is how people, this is my opinion, right? I haven't read many reviews on this book, to be honest, but I think this spoke to how people perceive the Chinese village that COVID originated and how people perceive that village post-COVID, because this is basically about Haiwan Village, which is a village that is where this disease starts from. So this book, A Plagued Sea, is basically our main character is taking care of her niece. They're boarding a train. As they're boarding, there becomes an outbreak of a zombie-like illness where people who have been exposed are becoming like sea creatures. They have like scales and their bones become morphed, and the illness is very visible on the outside. And because this has originated in this sea village town, the sea village town becomes isolated from society so that the illness is confined to this state. As we're learning, we kind of flash forward like 3 to 5 years in time, and our main character is becoming this like guard or neighborhood watch person who makes sure that people who have the illness are isolated and staying in their confinement into the homes. But in doing so, it flashes to the news cycles, and the news cycles kind of like talk about this town in such a condescending way, as opposed to feeling like, how can we do to help our people who are suffering? And I think that's kind of what speaks to like how COVID was seen. It's like it originated in this place, and like that place wasn't really like spoken about in the best of ways. And I think that that's what this book is leading to. That's what I got from it. I could totally be like, no, girl, you're wrong. But that's what I took from it, is like, instead of like helping our fellow humans, like we're talking about them as if like their lives don't matter as much because this is where this illness originated. And hello, that's like the complete opposite of what humanity is about. So this was a difficult read because it was just like a lot of metaphors, which I love. I love horror because I feel like horror does serve as a metaphor and a vehicle for a lot of different subjects that could be harder to write in nonfiction, but this is definitely it for a specific reader. I enjoyed the audiobook, but it's not something that I would reach for again. So I believe I will be doing a giveaway with this book. It comes out in August. And it is a 112 page book, so super easy to get through. I'd recommend, if you're a horror reader who loves reading a novella that's a bit more of a thinker and not so much as a jump scare, but like I do think it was really well written. It just was a little bit of a thinker, and sometimes you need that. I do think the prose was really beautiful, and I do think the translation like did sit with me. Like I thought that it was really well written. That is my review of The Plagued Sea. So those are all of the books that I read in June. I did have quite a few bangers. I am getting into the Summerween spirit, which is why I ended my month with The Plagued Sea. I'm currently reading a couple of Summerween thrillers balanced by some beach reads. If you are interested in The Misconnection and A Plagued Sea, I'm actually going to post a vlog next week, a weekend reading vlog of my thoughts live in real time. So if you are interested, please subscribe and you will see when that video goes up. I always appreciate you reading alongside and subscribing and supporting my channel. And I can't wait to see you in my next one. Bye.